So we're going to now move from cultural landscapes and historic urban landscapes to archaeology and to a discussion of archaeological sites and climate change. And it's a real honor and a privilege to introduce our speaker for that topic, Dr. Isabel Rivera-Collazo. A number of people have been called out today as being on the barricades on the forefront of trying to make this merger of culture, heritage, and climate change. And Isabel is most certainly one of them. It's been a pleasure for me and many of us to collaborate with Isabel over the years and thank her for her leadership in foregrounding the cultural dimensions of climate change. Isabel is currently an assistant professor on biological, ecological, and human adaptations to climate change at the University of California, San Diego. She has worked all over the world, not the least of which in her native Puerto Rico, and it's my pleasure to give you Dr. Isabel Rivera-Collazo.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to share my work with you. One second. So I don't think I need to emphasize at this point that we are facing a climate crisis. In general terms, the wider discussions of climate change that focus on the climate occurring by 2050, 2100, generally I've seen that has been giving us a false sense of security, as if change is not happening yet. It's something that we can try and work to avoid, try and look into the future to stop it, and things will continue as they are. This leads us to forget that climate change is not an event, but it's a process of changing weather patterns, the impacts of which are already happening. We are already deep into the path of changing conditions, leading us to the ugly scenarios of 2050 or 2100. In today's presentation, I would like to share with you how archaeology and archaeological sites can play a role in understanding the crisis, in helping us find solutions, and hopefully to contribute to mitigate our vulnerabilities. I'm teaching right now a class on the archaeology of climate change, and I have been insisting to my students that the problem is a social problem, that disasters are not a problem unless people are affected, so we need to find social solutions to this issue of vulnerability. We are used to the permanence of archaeological sites. These images show 800 years, 8 centuries of visual records of the pyramids of Giza. That is 800 years where cultural knowledge has told us, has informed us that things are permanent, that sites barely change. You can see comparing, for example, the image from the 1600s and today's photo. Archaeological sites have survived in our familiar landscapes for thousands of years. This permanence also allows us to identify the familiar, and is one of the reasons why tangible cultural heritage can be a source of resilience. They can provide distressed communities the places to become grounded and start the process of recovery after catastrophes. I remember being a student and thinking that I had the luxury of studying any site without a hurry. There is no previous knowledge, no previous experience warning me that they could change and they would change, let alone change within the time that it took between me being a student and me becoming a researcher with the power to return to study them. Why would I ever consider that a possibility? Why would any of us, if the pyramids of Giza haven't changed in 800 years, why would they change in the next 2? Well, the process of changing climate is proving us wrong. The process of changing and intensified weather is proving us wrong. Changing patterns are rapidly impacting our tangible cultural heritage. Here we can see some of the elements that have been identified, including coastal erosion, humidity variation, melting of the permafrost, changes in precipitation, temperature, seasonality, acidification of the oceans, migration of organisms, increasing bioturbation, even the activities to mitigate climate impacts. The ICOMOS document the future of our pasts, which I hope you have had the opportunity to read or will have a chance to look at it soon, has done an amazing job in identifying the multiple ways in which climate affects heritage, both tangible and intangible, from museums to memory and indigenous knowledges. Focusing on archaeological sites, many drivers of climate change are currently and very rapidly destroying those records, the speed of which has been compared to the burning of the Library of Alexandria. Climate change is demonstrating the impermanence of archaeology. In today's presentation, I want to share with you how this looks on the field. We Puerto Ricans always tell stories, so le voy a contar un cuento. I'm going to tell you a story. So I will share with you my own story with my work in Puerto Rico. There are 3 ways in which I engage in the archaeology of climate change: measuring the way climate is impacting our sites, recovering lessons from the past, and using heritage to communicate the magnitude of climate impacts and the urgency for climate action. Starting with the impacts of climate change, we have been able to downscale assessments, me and my colleagues, and mainly my colleagues in Puerto Rico. They have downscaled the climate drivers that are expected to impact Puerto Rico directly, and in the present and the near future. And we have identified higher sea temperature, higher sea level, increased frequency and intensity of storms, the flooding of storm surges associated with these storms, ocean acidification, intensified coastal erosion, as some of the main impacts that we can feel and have already been suffering. Focusing on storms and coastal erosion in particular, I work on the coastlines and underwater, but so focusing on the storms and coastal erosion, I have been following and documenting these variables as they affect my study area on the north-central coast of Puerto Rico. These are 2 large archaeological sites. The image to your right shows the study area that I have been focusing recently. We have been able, using LiDAR, that you can see the image down here, using LiDAR we have been able to identify a large archaeological site on the right side of the image, which is the east, and on the left side, which is the west, next to the river mouth, there is the ceremonial site of Playa Machuca or Tierras Nuevas, which are the 2 sites that I have been working on since 2013. These 2 sites are highly significant because they constitute one of the few locations in Puerto Rico's coastline to preserve the late Taino settlement pattern. Playa Machuca is the coastal ceremonial site, is the only surviving coastal ceremonial site with plazas and ball courts that has survived the sugarcane plantation and more recent development. It is located within the Esperanza Nature Reserve, which is managed by my partner, the NGO Para la Naturaleza, which are our allies in this project for heritage and biodiversity conservation. The landscapes preserve the entire human history of Puerto Rico, from the earliest settlements to the present, where still descendants of our Boricua ancestors still occupy the same environments. My team's work there is focused on studying the settlement patterns, identifying evidence of ancient storms and the human history of how people use the coastal environments and responded to high magnitude atmospheric events. Going back to coastal erosion, images tell a better story than I could ever explain to you, so let me share with you some photos. This is the view of the site between 2014 and 2015. To the right, you can see my students having a lunch break after our first excavation in 2015, having lunch next to Mount Day. This is how the coastline, these same images looked 3 weeks ago. The coastline is changing every day, exposing ancient Pleistocene soils as the coast migrates south in response to sea level rise and storm surge and high magnitude storm events. As these erosional processes continue, sites are washing out to sea every day, faster than anyone anticipated and faster than research can occur. A parallel problem to this is that funding is required to intervene, either excavating or to recover the context before they are completely gone, or using technology or to digitally collect the data before it's lost. However, the process of applying for funding can take multiple years. So it has not caught up with the urgency of climate change. Some of the proposals I submitted 2 years ago after Hurricane Maria are still under consideration, 2 years ago. By now, many of the sites are gone, and we might never know how much we lost because we didn't know how much we had to begin with. Another serious problem threatening the preservation of ancient knowledge and ancestral heritage are the official damage mitigating measures. In the case of Puerto Rico, flood control projects linked with a lack of acknowledgement of our ancestral ties of my people to the land and outdated bureaucratic processes have led to the destruction of heritage, including ancestral remains, without proper consultation with the public. This project shown here was intervened archaeologically. They did do an archaeological research, but in the process, and the urgency to mitigate floods in response to after Hurricane Maria led to hasty processes where both hurting the feelings of the descendants of these ancestors and as well the preservation of archaeological knowledge and climate change ancient climate change data has been lost. Mitigation of climate impacts, therefore, is also contributing to the loss of heritage. But why should we care about this? While we might be worried, why should we care at all about climate change impacting archaeological sites and destroying them? Why is this important? While we might be worried about climate change impacting us, the changing drivers of climate have the potential today, and through time as well, but today to impact our food and habitat security, which is what defines who we are. These practices are part of the way we do things, our cultural heritage. This heritage has deep roots that are registered in traditional knowledge, encoded in history, and registered in archaeological sites. It is modulated by colonialism and other historical processes. Our modern patterns of food and habitat security, the ways we are producing our modern ways of life, is what has triggered anthropogenic climate change. Our ancient ways of food and habitat in the context of changing climate can help us identify scenarios and alternate response strategies. For example, during Hurricane Maria, historical knowledge was used to obtain water from abandoned historical cisterns when the official water system collapsed and people didn't have potable water, didn't have drinking water. Accounts of past hurricanes and earthquakes have been widely circulated as examples that these things have happened in the past, that our ancestors could overcome them, and so can we. This historical memory has contributed to resilience and recovery. Archaeology and history can help extend that memory back in time. The sedimentological and archaeological record in Puerto Rico and other areas of the Caribbean suggests that between the years of 800 to 1000 of this era, there was a period of enhanced hurricane activity, and that the people of Puerto Rico lived through it. Assessing the archaeological record of the sites of Tibes in Ponce and Viví in Utuado, the project in Tibes is directed by archaeologist Antonio Curet, who's affiliated to the Smithsonian. So this record suggests that the hurricanes for which we have sedimentary records in Haiti, in the south of Puerto Rico, in Vieques, these records did impact these inhabited sites. In Tibes, archaeologist Antonio Curet identified a flood layer with human remains within it, showing that people perished in a flood that accumulated those sediments. In spite of this, in spite of mortality facing the hazard of a river flood, the ceremonial site shows restoration and reorganization after the flood. There was some level of adaptation to food procurement, and there was continued occupation. On the side of Viví, so Tibes is the red dot at the south, Viví is in the middle, Playa Machuca is on the north where I am working. So on the side of Viví, the record also shows impacts of flood at the same time period. In response, people were impacted. They ceremonially buried their batey, which is the ceremonial plaza, but continued, reoccupied it, and built a new ceremonial plaza, a new batey. These examples show that social priorities, such as living in a particular place, are more important than natural hazards, and that disaster experience and knowledge is transferred through generations. Finally, so what that I can recover lessons from the past? What can we do with this knowledge? So I would like to share with you how we can use heritage to inspire climate action. High-magnitude catastrophic events have strong social and environmental impacts. I am sure you're familiar with the impact of Hurricane Maria had over Puerto Rico, and not only Hurricane Maria, all the things that have been happening since then. Within my study location, the hurricane caused flooding, and the pressure of the storm surge and the river flood on both sides damaged the coastal sand dunes and the wetland ecosystems. As you can see in these before and after photos, the lower image is before the hurricane, and the upper image is a year later. In response, we created the project DUNAS, Descendants United for Nature, Adaptation, and Sustainability. Works the same in Spanish, Descendientes Unidos por la Naturaleza, Adaptación y Sustentabilidad. The project directives are to restore natural ecosystems, to protect cultural heritage, and to support resilient communities. And if you're interested, search Climate Science Alliance/DUNAS, and you'll reach our webpage. So this is the logic behind this project. People use the sand dune ecosystem, people use the coastlines, and sand dunes are a natural geomorphic feature of sandy coastal locations. But people cannot live on top of the sand dunes, because if you deforest, if you remove the vegetation cover of the sand dunes, the wind will pick up the sand and transport it away, so literally the land will move from beneath your feet. So people live behind the sand dunes landward. As sea level rises, sand transport changes, and the natural sedimentological and geomorphological processes make that sand dune migrate back. In the past, our ancestors moved their communities back. So the sand dune migrated south, and the houses migrated south, and the old settlement became buried under a sand dune. So that it was under a sand dune, the sand dune migrated over it. In the present, governance issues, modern characteristics of control impede easy relocation of these communities, including land ownership, etc. So sea level has been rising, storm surges are increasing, the sand of these sand dunes are being eroded, and the sand dune is trying to migrate back, so sand moves back to try and accumulate on the houses, and we get diggers and move the sand out, and the houses stay in the same place. This has two things. Sea level is continuing, and the storm surges will continue. These sand dunes are not stable, so they are going to continue being eroded. And the houses, the community behind it, is under a vulnerable position. But also, the ancient remains are being exposed through heritage. So we have the opportunity to bring the community to the coastline and show them on the site where they are living what is the impact of climate change. I don't need polar bears. I just show them, these are the remains of your ancestors. The sand dune wasn't here. It was further to the sea. The sea level is coming. What are we going to do? We began this project 1 year ago, working with our local partners, specifically the grassroots groups, Joa Maltinglar, Vidas, and the Taino community of Jayuya, and a group of the University of Puerto Rico in Aguadilla called Vida Marina. Last summer, Vida Marina helped us build a biomimicry system that they developed to trap sand using wooden planks, as you can see in that top image. We use natural processes of sand transport to trap sand and help the sand dune be restored. We also did an archaeological survey, and we did an archaeological excavation and included Taino rituals for honoring our ancestors. The beginning of the biomimicry system we brought the community members to help us restore these sand dunes, and it opened the conversation to the impacts of climate change. Through the archaeological excavation, it opened the conversation to people who have been living before and using these landscapes. The purpose of the archaeological excavation is to recover information of how our ancestors used the ancient ecosystems we are currently working on restoring, the sand dunes, the wetlands, the offshore reefs. We are also currently analyzing the evidence of ancient impact of past hurricanes. We took sediment cores from a wetland inside the study area, and we have super cool and awesome, and I have to geek about them, sediment records of ancient sea level rise and storm events, where we are currently studying them. My super awesome students are working on them now. The excavation also could happen because of the very hard work of many volunteers and local residents, to which I am very grateful. We are all very grateful. All the data has been collected and preserved digitally in 3D, and this allows us to preserve the data as the climate continues to change, as well as to share it with the public and to communicate climate change and climate action. Our mimicry system installed last summer has continued working, and our volunteers and leaders are currently maintaining it and repairing it and seeing change every day. They are acting to mitigate climate impacts right now as we speak. For our next step, we are working on a climate trail. Together with in our Dunas team, we designed the traveling backpacks that contain data on climate impacts to Puerto Rico. The table that I showed you of the expected climate impacts downscale, they have that table. They have tools to look at sand dune formation, to look at a wetland and sand dune ecosystem, and it also has the 3D printed images of the archaeological objects that we excavated during the summer. So through this trek, which can be guided by the NGO, will be guided by the NGO's interpreters, also the volunteers will guide their own trails, and it will be available as a digital self-guided tour. And all the packages of the backpacks will also be available. Through this trek, they will be able to see the impact that the hurricane had on the landscape, to see wetland biodiversity, to see sand dune biodiversity, to see how we can restore sand dunes with the biomimicry system, to understand how people had used this landscape in the past, to see, we will be incorporating the results of the archaeological excavation also. And at the end, which is step 5, so in step 4, they will be visiting the sites and using the objects to see what people did in the past. And at the end, in step 5, they will be looking at the community across the river and bring this to the present. What can we do? What problems can we see? What solutions can we think? And how can we be climate actors and engage and increase our ambition to engage with the Paris Agreement? This is a very poor community, so saying we have to move is not an option. So we have to think about creative solutions, consider all the constraints that these communities are facing. Heritage can help move our conversation, can help raise ambition, because losing heritage is losing ourselves. We have all that to lose. We are working with climate change now, not in the future. Heritage and archaeological sites can contribute to identifying solutions now in preparation for the future. Heritage on the field can make a call for action and increased ambition. Heritage on the field can make that call for action and increased ambition something concrete and real, and something that is doable. We have everything on the line. For our communities in Puerto Rico, our own survival is on the line. Similar hazards are being faced everywhere. We are all vulnerable. If this is not yet personal to you, take a moment and check your own privilege, starting by assessing your own food and habitat security. Many thanks for your attention, and thanks to all the people that have made this presentation possible.